Were you there when you were hearing that? Yeah.
I saw the
Yeah.
The confluence card, somebody told me that a couple days later it was already up to 160. Wow. Just for moving a carcass.
Yeah. There we go. Okay, we exist.
Good.
You say next slide.
I'll show you next slide.
Yep. Thanks for doing that.
Yeah, no problem.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being here. If this is your first Park Talk, welcome. If it isn't, welcome back. As some of you have known by now, this lodge was finished in 1938, about the same time as the Log Cabin Cafe across the street. If it looks familiar, there's a reason for that. It's currently owned by Henry Finkbeiner, who's gracious enough to let us use the space free of charge every Friday. We could give a quick round of applause for him. These talks were started many years ago with a few goals in mind, chief of which was to try to build a sense of community, both for those who live here and for those who don't. Many of you have never been to one of these before. You'll never get a guided wildlife tour from Silvergate Guides or story time with Rick McIntyre or a lecture on wolverines from Jim Halfpenny. Tonight, we're going to get to learn about Yellowstone's grizzlies from its chief biologist, Kerry Gunther. Thank you.
Okay, tonight I'm going to give a talk about grizzly bears in Yellowstone National Park. I'm going to start with the early history of the park, when it was first established, and then go all the way through to the present day, and show you how management has changed and how our bear population has changed. Next slide. So Yellowstone National Park was established in 1872. It was our country's first national park, although the people from Yosemite will correctly say that Yosemite was a state park before Yellowstone was a national park, and then Yosemite later became a national park. When Yellowstone was first set aside, the primary reason was to protect the geysers and thermal features, and bears and other wildlife really weren't one of the primary considerations. Next slide. So pretty early in the park's history, small log hotels, much like this one, were built at some of the geyser basins. And park visitors could come tour the geyser basins, come back to the hotel in the evening for dinner, and the food scraps from those hotel kitchens were just out of convenience, just dumped right out back behind the hotel. You got to remember back in the 1870s, there was a lot more food in food scraps and a lot less packaging, because all food was basically cooked from scratch. As early as 1888, the park superintendent was reporting that large numbers of black bears had begun to congregate at those garbage piles behind the park hotels. And by the early 1890s, the superintendent was reporting that large numbers of grizzly bears were now also congregating at those garbage piles. So it became kind of a tourist attraction in that you could visit the geyser basin during the day, come back to the hotel and have dinner, and then after dinner, go sit out behind the hotel and watch bears feed on the hotel's garbage. Next slide. And it became so popular with park visitors that the park kind of formalized the activity and created these lunch counters for bears. So this was a log platform, and they would take the choicest barrels of kitchen scraps, throw it on that platform, and then people could come and sit in log bleachers, watch bears feed on the garbage with very calm horses that would give interpretive talks to the people watching the bears feed on garbage. You see all these poles in there, that's places where black bears can climb when the grizzlies show up. Next slide. So this shows the log bleachers. This guy must have had a calm horse because he's standing there giving a talk. But we had 3 of these different feeding stations throughout the park, and so several thousand visitors a night could sit and watch bears feed on garbage. Next slide. Also by the early 1890s, the park superintendent was reporting that some grizzly bears and black bears had gotten very aggressive about obtaining human foods. They had become conditioned to human foods and garbage, and they were breaking into the hotel kitchens and the canvas wall tents where visitors stayed to eat human foods from those buildings and tents. And the superintendent in 1890 thought he was going to have to remove some of the more aggressive bears to solve the problem. Next slide. Now, when Yellowstone was established, motor vehicles weren't in this area yet, and so all travel to the park was by horse and wagon. And but as early as 1910, the superintendent was reporting that some black bears had learned to panhandle for human food handouts along park roads. We didn't get our first motorized vehicles coming into the park until 1915. So even 5 years before we had cars, black bears had learned to panhandle food from park visitors. Next slide. And so panhandling bears quickly became a primary tourist attraction in the park. Yellowstone became known as a place where you could see bears up close. Next slide. You could feed bears. Next slide. You could pet bears. Next slide. You could use food to lure bears into interesting positions for photographs. These people were trying to make it look like this bear was driving their car. Next slide. And next slide. And then management of our campgrounds and developments was also quite a bit different. So we didn't have bear-proof garbage cans, and we didn't have bear-proof food storage lockers. And so it was pretty much a nightly occurrence that bears would come in and join park visitors for dinner, serving their food. And things were really crazy that way when we read all the old records of what bears did in campgrounds and what the public was putting up with. Next slide. So having these bears that were highly conditioned to human handouts and garbage, really great. And so from 1931 through 1969, the park began keeping good records of human bear conflicts in 1931. So from 31 through 69, we averaged 138 bear-caused property damages per year in the park. And with that many property damages, a lot was probably not even reported. That's what was being reported on average per year. Next slide. Having all those bears that were pretty habituated towards people, very tolerant of people, but also highly food conditioned, also led to a lot of bear-afflicted human injuries. We're averaging 48 attacks per year. Now, with today's lawyers and lawsuits, if we had 48 bear maulings a year, I would probably be out of a job. And the park would be broke pretty quick from all the lawsuits. Next slide. And early park managers understood what the problem was, but initially were reluctant to fix it because, especially in the early history of the park, national parks were a brand new idea, and the Park Service wanted to convince Congress that it was a good idea, and so they wanted tourists to come to Yellowstone and other national parks, and bears was one of the big attractions. So through a lot of the park's early history, not much was done to solve this problem of food-conditioned bears damaging property and injuring a lot of people. But early managers did recognize that the high number of human-bear conflicts was due to these food-conditioned bears interacting so closely with park visitors. Next slide. And it wasn't just Yellowstone National Park that had a lot of human-bear conflicts. All the major national parks that had bear populations were seeing a lot of conflicts. So Glacier National Park, Yosemite National Park, Sequoia National Park, Kings Canyon, Grand Canyon, Great Smoky Mountains, Shenandoah. All these parks were having a lot of human-bear conflicts, a lot of property damages, a lot of bear-afflicted human injuries. Then in 1967, in Glacier National Park, on what's called the Night of the Grizzlies, 2 women were killed by 2 different grizzly bears in 2 separate incidents in different locations in the park. And that was kind of a wake-up call for the National Park Service that it had to change people management and bear management to try to solve this problem. So these 2 fatalities in Glacier in 1967 were a catalyst for change in the national parks. So all the national parks that had bear populations began writing new bear management plans to try to solve this problem. And these are kind of adaptive management plans that change and evolve over time. Next slide. So in Yellowstone National Park, we completed our new bear management plan in 1970. We actually began implementing parts of it in 1968, the year before, just the year just after the 2 fatalities in Glacier National Park. But our new bear management plan, the objectives were, first of all, to continue to maintain viable populations of grizzly bears and black bears in Yellowstone National Park. That's one of the mandates of national parks, is to maintain the natural species that are found there. But another objective of the plan was to return all bears to subsistence on the natural foods and native foods found in the park instead of human food handouts and garbage. Another objective then was to reduce the number of bear-caused property damages occurring in the park, and then to reduce the number of bear-inflicted human injuries in the park. And by reducing those 2 types of human-bear conflicts, park managers believed it would reduce the number of bears that they had to capture and send to zoos or kill in management actions. Next slide. So this shows, this was the Trout Creek dump in Hayden Valley, but Yellowstone Park would close the West Thumb garbage dump in 1968, and also the Tower Falls dump in 1968, the year right after those deaths in Glacier. We closed the Rabbit Creek dump in the Old Faithful area in 1970, and then we closed the Trout Creek dump in 1971. The Trout Creek dump is probably the most famous dump. It was the largest dump in the park, and it's where the Craighead brothers, John and Frank, were doing their early grizzly bear research. John and Frank Craighead were one of the first people to radio collar grizzly bears. They, the bears they were capturing with the radio collar were all in Hayden Valley, or mostly in Hayden Valley. Next slide. And in addition to Yellowstone National Park closing its dumps, the state of Montana also closed 3 garbage dumps in the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem. The West Yellowstone dump outside the park was closed in 1970. The Gardner, Montana dump was closed in 1978. And then the Cook City dump just down the road here was closed in 1979. So over about a 12-year period, all the garbage dumps in the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem that had large aggregations of grizzly bears were closed. Next slide. Another part of the 1970 Bear Management Plan was regulations strictly prohibiting the recreational hand feeding of bears. And then we converted our garbage cans to a bear-proof design. So this is one of the original garbage cans from the late 1960s, early 1970s. There's a 6-inch slab of cement buried into the ground. There's a thick 4-inch diameter steel pipe embedded in the concrete that holds this hood over the top of the can, and it works kind of like a mailbox. People probably don't use mailboxes much anymore, but when you open this up, it closes off the neck of the hood so a bear can't reach down and get garbage. And these have been highly successful at preventing bears from getting garbage in Yellowstone National Park ever since. We did have one famous bear. It was nicknamed Crusher, and this Crusher lived in the fishing bridge area was in Crusher's home range, and Crusher would just beat the sides of the can long enough and hard enough that there'd be big dents in the side, and that would lower the top of the can on the lip of this hood just enough that if he punched the bottom, he could get the can to come out and eat the garbage. We removed Crusher, and that solved that problem. And in my time in Yellowstone, I've worked here a pretty long time, but we've only had, I can only recall 2 incidents, again, since that time, where bears, we had last year where a big male, and it wasn't this type of can, it was a big 8 cubic yard dumpster that weighed 800 pounds empty, and then full of garbage weighed a lot more. He learned to flip the garbage can, the dumpsters over. We have a top loading garbage truck. So there's 2 forks in the front, lifts the dumpster overhead, dumps the garbage into the top of the truck, and then the truck puts it back down. Well, he learned, so because of that, it has a gravity top, so when it's upside down, it opens. This bear learned to flip the dumpsters over and get the garbage. We removed that bear also, that solved that problem. You have a question here?
Do bears ever get in those? Like I could see a cub trying to climb in.
Yeah, but this door goes down, and so when you pull it open, it actually swings the neck shut. So
But they couldn't like teeter in and then end up in the can.
in my time here, we've had that happen once down at the south entrance, and we just climbed a tree. We hooked, and it was on a dumpster. This thing had to top it on a big dumpster, so we hooked a rope up to the big top, and then with a pulley, we climbed up a tree and opened it up, and the bear climbed out, and then we let it slam shut. And that bear never did it again. So yeah, I think he spent a night in there before somebody brought garbage in the morning, and this bear had popped out. So. Next slide. Another part of our 1970 management plan was to clean up our backcountry. So Yellowstone National Park is pretty popular for both backpackers and horsepackers. And prior to our 1970 management plan, you could just get a fire permit and you could camp anywhere in the backcountry that you wanted. So in 1972, as part of our 1970 management plan, we implemented a designated campsite system. So we knew where people were camping, and then in every campsite, we would put up one of these food storage poles or a metal food storage locker. So we have 300 campsites in the park. 260 of them have these food storage poles, and 40 of them have food storage lockers. And it's really cleaned up our backcountry. It's very rare now to have a human-bear conflict in the backcountry. Next slide. So this shows one of our designated backcountry campsites. There's a little signpost with a tag that gives the campsite number. So you make a reservation for the campsites you want for your trip. This campsite has a food pole. You can just barely see the packs hanging there. And then there's a fire ring. So the idea is you store your food, cook your food, and eat your food in this core camp. And then you're supposed to set your tents up at least 100 yards away so that your tents are not where the food odors are at. These people in this picture, they're probably only 40 or 50 yards away. They should have kept going around this meadow and set their tents up further. They're a little bit close, but better than some. A couple years ago in Lamar, I was hiking, came to a campsite, and people had set the tent right under the food pole. So the bear would try to climb their tent to get the food, I guess. Next slide. Another part of our management program is moving ungulate carcasses. So we have big populations of bison, elk, deer. We also have some moose. And when a bison or an elk dies, it's like a bear magnet. It attracts and holds a lot of bears in one area. So if we have a bison or an elk or some other ungulate die in a campsite or in a developed area or right next to the road or right next to the trail, we move those carcasses so that people don't stumble on a bunch of bears feeding on a carcass. This is a bison carcass, and you can see there's 5 grizzly bears around it. In Hayden Valley, we've seen as many as 23 grizzly bears on one bison carcass. So it's kind of scary when you run into that. So we move about 100 large ungulate carcasses per year. I have a master's degree in fish and wildlife management, and I never had a class in moving carcasses. If you've ever moved a bison carcass, it is not easy. And there was recently, we were just moving carcass earlier this week, and it's all over social media, and it claims that we were using kitchen knives, but we actually have butcher knives. We're not that primitive to just use a kitchen knife to try to move a carcass. And we also have winches on our trucks and a pulley system, so we're pretty efficient at moving carcasses when we have to. Next slide. Some of the reasons we move carcasses, again, this is a photo of two grizzlies fighting over a carcass about 10 yards off the road in the Old Faithful area. One of the bears happens to be one of our radio-colored bears. But some of the reasons we move carcasses is it's such a good food that even if there's 200 people 20 yards away, a bear's going to oftentimes come and feed on it. And then that really habituates the bear, makes it more tolerant of people, which then complicates our management quite a bit in the future. We also sometimes, it's just to reduce traffic congestion now with 5 million park visits a year. If you have a carcass too close to the road, it'll jam up traffic for miles and start getting road rage incidents. And so to try to keep traffic moving, we also move these carcasses that are too close to roads. It's also for bear safety, because if a bear maybe injures somebody in a carcass, then we might have to take management action against the bear. And it's a lot for visitor safety. We've never had at a roadside bear jam somebody get hurt by a bear, but we have had several times where people have been hit by cars at bear jams. And then at the most recent carcass we moved at the confluence of Soda Butte and Lamar, there was a whole wall of people in lawn chairs set up just watching the carcass. And right behind them was a steep hill. And if you look at that hill, there's a game trail coming right down. And so they're so focused on the carcass, they're not thinking about what might be coming from behind them. Next slide. Another part of our program is we put in a lot of bear-proof food storage lockers, both in our front country roadside campgrounds, as well as in our backcountry campsites. So the park has nearly 2,000 campsites in the roadside campgrounds. We're 87% complete with these new bear boxes. We used to put in a smaller bear box that held the average size cooler that we had in the 70s and 80s. Well, today everybody shows up with these giant Yeti coolers, holds a lot more beer, but they didn't fit in the bear boxes we had. So we're replacing all the bear boxes and adding these big 30 cubic foot ones that currently will hold the biggest size coolers. I imagine in 10 years, Americans will be even thirstier and we'll have to go bigger. But these are pretty cost efficient. We've had some of them been in place for over 30 years now, and they're still working. We're still trying to finish, we're working in the Grand Village campground, putting the last bear boxes in there. All the other campgrounds are currently finished. And we tested these bear boxes at the Grizzly and Wolf Discovery Center over at West Yellowstone. We took the bears' favorite treats, put it inside, and then we give each set of bears, all the bears come out in pairs there with another bear they get along with. And we let each pair of bears, they had 8 bears at the time, have an hour to try to break in, and then we chose which bear boxes worked the best. And so this is one of the bear savers. This is what we're installing in all the campsites. Next slide. There were some short-term negative consequences of our 1970 management program. We saw high human-caused mortality initially when we closed the dumps and prohibited recreational hand feeding of bears. We also saw lower cub production and survival of the cubs. And that ultimately led to grizzly bears being listed as a threatened species in 1975. Next slide. So after we closed our dumps and the state closed their 3 dumps, a lot of bears had grown up primarily eating garbage, some natural foods, but also a lot of garbage. And so a lot of those bears couldn't cope with the loss of human foods and garbage. And so they caused conflicts, property damages, trying to get garbage. So a lot of those bears were removed in management actions. Next slide. So this shows the mortality for that 1968 through 1979 period when the garbage dumps were closed. And I will point out, this bear's not dead. I just thought it was a cute way to introduce mortality because it looks like he's dead, but it's just a cub playing on a rock. But in Yellowstone National Park, during that 68 through 79 period, we had 68 human-caused mortalities. Almost all of those are management removals. A few of them were roadkill. And then outside the park, the states, they closed 3 garbage dumps. And during that same time period, they removed 179 grizzly bears for a total of 247 grizzly bear deaths during that period of the dump closures. And Cook City was one of the notorious dumps where a lot of bears were feeding at and causing problems for years. Next slide. So what happened to our females was, so natural foods fluctuate widely year to year. And so like white bark pine is a really good fall food, good in protein and fat, and bears use it to fatten up in the fall before hibernation. But white bark pine is a masting species. So to outcompete the species that eat it, white bark pine will put out a lot of seeds one year, so many seeds that the animals that eat white bark pine can't eat it all. And then the next year might be a bust year, and then that reduces the population of those species that eat it. So white bark pine, for instance, if it's a poor year, bears could just go eat garbage instead of white bark pine. And without that garbage, then our females, they didn't gain weight as quickly. And if they had a litter of cubs and they're nursing those cubs for 3 years, then it would take longer. So we saw the interbirth interval, the number of years between litters of cubs increase because they weren't putting on fat as quickly. We saw the age of first reproduction increase. So instead of having their first litter at 5 years old, they were having their first litter at 8 or 9 years old because they wouldn't get, as they matured, they wouldn't get fat as quick as they used to when they also had the dumps as food. And then we saw the average litter size decrease. So we started seeing fewer 3-cub litters and more 1-cub litters and about the same number of 2-cub litters. So we had lower cub production and survival initially. Next slide. And so the high mortality for management removals combined with the lower cub production and survival led to a significant population decline. So the Craighead brothers, this is John and Frank, actually that's John and that's Frank. They did research in the park from 1959 to 1967, and they estimated in that time period there was 222 to 245 grizzly bears in the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem, with most of those bears centered in Yellowstone National Park. And they estimated that those bears were occupying a little over 15,000 square kilometers, which I just gave a college talk to scientists use metric. So that's about 6,000 square miles. Next slide. And then by 1974, with the high mortality and the lowered cub production, the Craighead brothers estimated there was only 136 grizzly bears left in the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem. Again, with most of those bears centered in Yellowstone National Park. And that resulted then in 1975 in grizzly bears being listed as a threatened species. Next slide. But on a long-term basis, I think everybody, even the Craighead brothers, would believe that the 1970 management plan was a huge success over the long term. So next slide. So first of all, we wean bears off human food handouts and garbage. Even with 5 million visitors, we have less than a dozen incidents per year where grizzly bears and black bears get human food or garbage, which is really remarkable when you think most of our visitors don't really know that much about living or recreating in bear habitat. Next slide. This graph shows grizzly bear human conflicts from the late 60s. So just when we started closing the dumps, we were averaging over 50 human bear conflicts per year. Went down quite a bit by 72. And then from like 1973 on, you can see we're very low number of human bear conflicts. And since 2020, even with this big increase we're seeing in visitation, we're at one of our lowest levels of human-bear conflicts ever in the history of the park. Next slide. This shows grizzly bear mortality. The blue is human caused, which is in the park primarily management removals with a few road kills. And the green is natural mortalities. So you can see in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, almost all our mortality was management removals of problem bears that were damaging property or injuring people. But from the 1980s on, as our 1970 plan, we started kicking in, we really started seeing the results. Now more than half of our mortality every decade is from natural causes. Bears dying of old age, which almost never happened prior to that. Because as the teeth wore down, they would really get in trouble usually. But now we're seeing a lot of bears just dying of old age, a few getting killed by other bears because of the high density bears we have, and a few getting killed by wolves. Next slide. So again, population estimates from 1959 through 1970, the Craig brothers estimated 222 to 245 grizzly bears in the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem. By 1974, down to 136 grizzly bears because of the garbage dump closures and the bear proofing of all our garbage. Yes. Okay, still working. And now in 2026, our population estimate for this year is 1,055 grizzly bears. So we have almost 3 times as many bears now as we did even when the dumps were open. The bears have learned how to feed on the natural foods. All the bear proofing we do with bear-proof garbage cans, dumpsters, and food storage boxes has really reduced the need to remove bears in management actions. And so that's allowed the bear population to increase. Next slide. So this might be hard to read, but we now have more grizzly bears, 1,055 versus 245 when the dumps were open, occupying a much bigger area, over 27,000 square miles of the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem, compared to just about 6,000 square miles when the dumps were open. And this shows, this is out in Hayden Valley. This is a wolf-killed bull elk. You can still see some wolves lying around, hoping still to get some meat. Grizzly bears have come in and usurped that carcass. You can see there's a whole bunch of grizzly bears feeding on that. The wolves got the first meal, and then the bears came in and took it from them. Next slide. Now this shows, this is the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem. The dark blue is the recovery zone where the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service wanted us to recover a viable population of grizzly bears. The hashed area is the area currently occupied by grizzly bears. And then the light blue area is areas where we don't consider it 100% occupied yet, but it's areas the bears are pioneering into. So you can see the expansion from the recovery zone. And then the same goes for the Northern Continental Divide area. The recovery zone is inside that dark blue line. The hashed area is where grizzly bears currently occupy. And then the light blue surrounding it is the areas grizzly bears are pioneering into. So you can see from the 6,000 square miles in the 1970s to over 27,000 square miles occupied today. Next slide. We'll go back and I'll explain this. Yeah, so this next slide is kind of a moving map. It'll show over time the expansion of bears from Yellowstone National Park and into the ecosystem. And so the dark green, so the yellow line, I gotta look at my map here. The yellow line is the recovery zone. The blue line is the demographic monitoring area. So that's the area where we monitor grizzly bear cub production and mortality. And then we just haven't been able to keep up with grizzly bears. So they're now beyond that monitoring area as well. But the blue is, the green will be females. And then the brown, I believe, is males. So you can go to the next one now. Oh. Yeah, so the green is total occupied range. And you can see it's filling in the Wind River Range, the Wyoming Range. The recovery zone is full, it's moving beyond. And that's, again, I need to update that again. It ends at 2020. We're not already in 2026. Time flies. But I need to update that slide. You can just see the growth over time. We've had one bear from Gardner, Montana, where I live up here, that ended up over by Dillon, Montana, a sub-adult male that dispersed. Unfortunately, he got into a sheep herd, and so he was removed. We had another bear that was closer to Bear Lake, Utah, than it was to Yellowstone National Park. Again, it was a dispersing sub-adult male who also got into sheep and got removed, but it just shows you the range that they can cover. Next slide. So one of our concerns, Yellowstone National Park and the Greater Yellowstone Ecosystem has been isolated from all other grizzly bear populations since the 1920s. So in the 1860s and 1870s, when railroads made it from the East Coast to the West Coast, the transcontinental railroads, by the 1870s, then made cattle and sheep a very profitable business because you could cost effectively ship cattle and sheep back to the East Coast where the big population centers were, and from there even on to Europe. So during the cattle industry and sheep industry heyday, from the 1870s through the 1930s, there was a lot of shooting, trapping, and poisoning of bears to protect cattle and sheep. And so Yellowstone National Park became isolated in that time because of the cattle and sheep industries around us. And so Yellowstone was just this isolated place, and then because it was a national park where we didn't have commercial grazing, grizzly bears survived in the park. And so one of our worries is genetic inbreeding because we don't have any mixture from bears from other areas. But we collect DNA samples from every bear that we capture, every roadkill bear, every bear we remove in the management actions. Basically, any dead grizzly bear we find, we get a DNA sample, and we look at the rate of inbreeding. And even being isolated since the 1920s, our rate of inbreeding is still very low, 0.2%. So nothing critical yet, but we are worried about the long-term effects of that. So 3 years ago, we took a male grizzly bear and a female grizzly bear, both subadults at the time, 4-year-olds from the northern continental divide ecosystem up around Glacier, and we moved them down to the Yellowstone. We weren't sure if it was going to work or not, but this year, and we radio collared those two bears. This year when we flew in the spring, the female was sitting outside of the den with 2 cubs a year. So she bred in the Yellowstone ecosystem with a Yellowstone male. And then the male bear we brought down here on 2 of our different flights a couple weeks apart. He was escorting a female in estrus. So both those bears have now spread their DNA. And the geneticists believe that if we just have 2 successful reproductions every 10 years, that we don't really have to worry about genetic inbreeding. And so we've now had 2 for this 10-year period with those 2 bears we brought down. Next slide. And our long-term hope is that we don't have to bring any more bears down, that we can get natural connectivity between the 2 ecosystems. And so again, this map shows, again, Yellowstone and Glacier National Parks, the recovery zone in yellow for each ecosystem, the occupied range, and then the light pink again is where those dispersing bears are starting to be seen. And we're currently now, the occupied range is only 60 miles apart between the 2 ecosystems. So certainly within the dispersing distance of a subadult grizzly. And so we're hoping we start getting natural connectivity so we don't have to bring more bears down. And we do know what the genetics will look like because we had a problem bear from Yellowstone that went to a zoo and a problem bear from Glacier that went to a zoo. They bred those in the zoo, and so now we know what the DNA for Yellowstone Northern Continental Divide cross will look like. Next slide. We've also done some DNA work with black bears. Since grizzly bears are a threatened species, almost all of our research time and effort has gone into grizzly bears. Black bears are still found throughout the United States, so less concerned about them. But a couple of years ago, I had a graduate student, and we set up hair snares where we just snag hair from bears. Basically, it's a little triangle of barbed wire about knee high with a scent lure in there, not anything with a food reward. The bear crawls under to investigate it. The barbed wire snags a little bit of hair, and then we run DNA on the hair. And we only did the northern third of Yellowstone National Park, so basically the northern range, the Lamar Valley to Gardner's Hole. And we came up with 20 black bears per 100 square kilometers, which is pretty high. The next highest in the northern Rocky Mountains is 6 to 12 black bears per 100 square kilometers. So Yellowstone National Park is one of the highest densities of black bear in the northern Rocky Mountains. And I see a couple of people that work at Tower. I think they know what I'm talking about. And then I just had another graduate student. We completed a really cool project where we got a research permit, set out 120 trail cameras at random locations throughout the park. And doing computer-generated random locations gets you into some hellacious places in the backcountry. But all these cameras were synced in time, and every 10 minutes, every camera in the park would take a picture. And these are all in the backcountry, and not near trails and stuff. And then they were also motion triggered, and so we could model it by separation by distance and separation by time to get a population estimate. And that population estimate for black bears was park-wide, because we cameras throughout the park, 10 black bears per 100 kilometers park-wide. So lower than what we see on the northern range, but a lot of the rest of the park is highly occupied by grizzly bears, and you generally have fewer black bears like Hayden Valley, places like that. So these two estimates correlate with each other pretty well. Next slide. Oh, let me go to this too. So for the whole park, with the trail camera system, we estimated 910 black bears for Yellowstone National Park. Next slide. Oh, I already showed this.
Yeah.
Duplicate, go get it. So our management plan from 1970 has really done a great job of solving most of our bear problems. It's very rare for bears to damage property or injure people anymore. It's very rare that we have to remove a problem bear. We remove a problem bear about once every 6 years now, instead of multiple bears every year. So our biggest challenge today, though, is these human habituated bears. So these are bears, they've learned to live with people. And with 5 million visitors, if they ran every time they saw a visitor, they'd spend their whole summer running. So these bears have learned to tolerate people. They'll forage and feed in roadside meadows with hundreds of people watching, and the people are just kind of benign background noise to them. So just trying to manage the people that want to see and photograph these bears is a big challenge. Then we have a lot of dedicated staff working on it. A couple of them sitting right back there. You can see this is the case. You can see a park ranger right here. Sometimes if there's a wall of people and the bear wants to cross to feed in the meadow on the other side, the bear can't get across because all these people. So our bear jam people kind of know how to recognize that, and then they split the crowd, let the bear across to feed on in the meadow on the other side. And that's what this ranger here has done. Next slide. This shows just a typical bear jam. There's a bear down in this meadow out of frame. But this shows you got to figure for every 3.5 people here, there's a car somewhere, probably in the middle of the road. So this is our biggest challenge, just trying to manage the people in traffic that love bears. Next slide. Here's a pretty well managed bear jam. You can see 3 rangers interacting with the crowd. They got everybody off the pavement. The cars are all parked off the fog line so traffic can get through. So that's what we're striving for. We currently manage 500 to 1,000 bear jams per year. Last year, I think we were closer to 1,500 bear jams, but this is our 10-year average anyway. And we put in 2,500 to 3,500 staff hours every summer just managing people in traffic that are there to watch bears. And we get reports of bear jams that we can't even get to because we don't have enough staff. So from the reports we get, we're managing about 70 to 80% of the bear jams park-wide, 20 to 30% go unmanaged, just the public with the bear doing who knows what. And unstaffed bear jams are probably underreported because the staffed bear jam always gets reported. But if we don't have staff there, some get reported, some don't. Next slide. This shows this shows what happens when we don't have staff present. So this is a really big bear, and this is a woman just a car's length away from that really big bear. She behaves wrong in any way, you don't know what that bear's going to do. Luckily, these bears are pretty used to visitors and traffic, and he's just trying to get to the carcass on the other side of the road, probably. Next slide. So we realized, again, somebody too close, but we realized we need to develop more effective methods to promote proper bear viewing etiquette among our visitors and photographers, so that we don't have to be there to keep people from getting that close if they just know and understand that for their safety, they should, and for bear safety, they shouldn't get that close. Next slide. So we do have a regulation, you're supposed to stay 100 yards from a bear, but most people don't follow that. Next slide. And next slide. Another study I did completed a few years ago, was just looking at everything that Yellowstone grizzly bears eat. Grizzly bears, a lot of people think of them as a specialist, but they're not. They're an omnivore generalist. They eat a lot of different things. So I came up with, I looked at bear scats, and I looked at feed sites where we found bear sign, and then direct observations of bears feeding. And we came up with 267 different species that bears consumed, plus one soil type that they ate. So this included 175 different plant species, 38 different species of insects, 34 different mammals, 7 species of mushrooms, 7 bird species, 4 fish species, 1 amphibian, algae, and then geothermal soil. The algae, I don't think bears are actually trying to consume, but if there's a carcass in a pond or a river and they're consuming it, I think they ingest some algae and it shows up in the scats, but they're definitely ingesting it. The geothermal soil, they definitely purposely eat. So we, thermal areas around the park, especially in the spring, we'll find these pits where you can see the bear claw marks and bear tracks leading up to it. And then we often find a dirt bear scat right next to these pits. We see this activity mostly in the spring, so we think they're going after minerals after spending 5 months hibernating. But there's minerals in this thermal soil. One of these years, I'd like to analyze some of the thermal soil samples so I can see maybe what minerals the bears are after. But I just haven't had the budget for that yet. Next slide. I talked about white bark pine a little bit. It's a really good quality food. 52% fat and about 4 kilocalories per gram. And white bark pine, and it's this perfect food for late summer and fall when bears are in hyperphagia trying to put on fat to spend 5 months hibernating in their winter den. It's also found at remote locations. White bark pine, you'll find some at lower elevations, but generally it's only the trees above 8,000 feet that really produce a lot of cones that bears go after. So it tends, most of our roads are below 8,000 feet, so it tends to separate bears and people in time and place, which reduces conflicts. We've seen a lot of mortality of white bark pine in the last decade. Most of it from mountain pine beetle. which is a native beetle to this area. But with these warmer winters that we've been getting, the beetle can survive up at higher elevations. And so instead of feeding all on the lower elevation trees, it's now feeding on high elevation white bark pine. So we've seen a lot of mortality from that. We also have blister rust, which is a fungus that's come in from Europe on exotic trees that were brought out into the United States, and then it spread through the United States. Blister rust has killed about 95% of the white bark pine trees up in Glacier National Park, but Glacier is a much moister climate. Our kind of dry climate here, we don't see as much mortality from blister rust. We see individual branches dying, but not a lot of whole trees dying from blister rust. So what bears do is they wait for the red squirrels, mainly to harvest the cones, store them in bins at the base of the trees. Then grizzly bears go in and eat the squirrels' store of cones for the winter. If the bear can catch the squirrel, they'll eat the squirrel too. But some years when cone production is really good, the bears aren't even just waiting for the squirrels to harvest. They'll go up the trees and harvest cones themselves. And both grizzly bears and black bears will do this. The difference is a squirrel harvests individual cones and drops them down. A bear bites off whole branches and drops them down, and then eats the cones. One time I was tracking one of our radio-colored bears, and I was in this white bark pine forest, and every tree had a ring of branches underneath. And I thought, man, there must have been quite a windstorm up here for all these trees to lose that many branches. And I got to look at the branches closely, and there was bear bite marks and bear hair stuck in all the branches. So, and this was a grizzly bear. He'd been up there breaking off branches, dropping them to the ground, and then eating the cones. Next slide. Now, as I mentioned earlier, white bark pine is a masting species. It'll put out a lot of cones one year and almost no cones the next. This year is one of the years it's putting out a lot of cones. But in a year like last year, where we only averaged about 3 or 4 cones per tree, there's not enough white bark really for bears to survive on in the fall, so they eat other things. What we see our males doing, then they usurp a lot more carcasses from wolf packs in the fall if white bark pine isn't producing a lot of seeds. And our female bears, because male bears dominate the carcasses, our female bears eat truffles and underground mushrooms in the fall if there's not a lot of white bark production. Next slide. I threw this in to show there's no body shaming in the bear world. Bears spend 5 months living off their body fat. So this is what a bear wants to look like in the fall. And a lot of people think that bears hibernate because of the cold weather. It's really not the cold, it's the lack of food. So, bears have a very thick fur coat, a thick layer, they can get inches of fat. And then they have a low surface area to body mass ratio. So you can see they're kind of round, where a desert animal is usually lanky to dissipate heat. Bears are built to retain heat. So they can actually survive very well in cold weather, but the cold weather results in a lack of food. So as I mentioned, bears eat a lot of insects. There's not insects out in the winter. Bears dig a lot of roots. The ground is frozen and buried in snow, so they can't dig roots. They eat a lot of berries. Berries are usually already consumed or desiccated by the time winter comes along. So bears can't just, there's just not much for a bear to eat in the winter. Next slide. Okay, I'll give you this in a bit. But, so this next one, don't hit it yet. This is a bear rub tree. And it's going to be hard to see, but you can see these tracks going up to the rub tree. That's what we call a traditional trail. And so bears can kind of converse with each other. They leave messages of who's there, who's around, and they do this mainly during the breeding season from mid-May to mid-July. And over decades, bears use the same rub trees and step in the exact same tracks leading to their rub tree. So you can find tracks that are a couple inches deep where bears do, we call it the sumo walk or the cowboy walk. They have scent pads, scent glands in their foot pads, and as they walk, they kind of do a John Wayne walk and they twist their feet. which scientifically on the data sheet we call twisty feet. So this is a bear approaching, and he does all the classic stuff. He does the John Wayne walk, the twisty feet, and then he'll straddle a sapling and dribble a little urine on it. And this lets the ladies in estrus know that, hey, I'm around. So yeah, you can hit this one now. Then he's checking the rut tree to see who else has been there. Is the dominant male of the area, is he hanging around? Is there an estrus female around? And then he'll do a little bit of a pole dance.
Is this on the camera or?
This is on a trail camera, yeah. They never do it in front of you. And then he'll straddle this little sapling, leave a little yarn dribble.
I was here.
Okay, next slide. This is a bear coming in from the other direction. You can hit it again. You see, he does the sapling straddle first. And then the pole dance.
This is not the same bear.
Yeah, different bear. And then the cowboy walk with the twisty feet. And just hit this one once now. Yeah, okay, I'll explain this. So this was a roadkill pronghorn antelope. And roadkill, we always move away from the road because bears and wolves will come in to feed on it and then they'll get hit by cars. So I drug this off the road. We drug it about 100 yards and then put a trail camera on it. And then these are all actually still photos. And over an 8-hour period, this bear comes in and eats the entire pronghorn. This is mid-August, so the bear's in hyperphagia where he's just trying to put on weight for hibernation. And he eats the whole thing over an 8-hour period. I figured you guys didn't want to sit here for 8 hours and look at every photo. So they're all linked together. It'll kind of look like a video, but it's not. It's just still photos linked together, okay? Then at one point, some organs fall out, and he goes and eats the organs, and then goes back to the.
So nothing else came to eat.
Right at the end, some coyotes came in after he left. There you got the organs.
How big is his stomach? Like internally?
They can gain several pounds a day, even just eating vegetation, because they just eat all day long. Next slide.
Was
And this,
100, 120 pounds of pronghorn that the bear can see?
yeah, 120, maybe 130. It wasn't a huge pronghorn, but it wasn't a small one either. Okay, this next one is a bear fishing for cutthroat trout. So the bear's in the lower right-hand corner. He'll come in and grab a fish, exit the frame. Then he comes back later with I don't know if it's a second fish or he just is showing off the first fish. So, and this one has some sound where you can hear the water, so I'll give you the mic. He'll come back, and I don't know if he ate it, caught another, or if it's the same one. They don't catch them really.
Again, we also see wolves sometimes hanging out at these spawning streams, and we think they're catching fish as well. I've only seen a wolf catch a fish once, but we find them a lot at these spawning streams. Here, let me explain this next one.
And now this next is going to be a series of 3 short videos, and it's a bison carcass that 3 males are all trying to feed on, and the dominant male kind of takes it and stands on it. And on the second or third slide, there's a smaller male that has drug a piece away, and just to show his dominance, that male goes and takes that smaller piece of the carcass away from it. So during the breeding season, there's actually a lot of fighting between bears and actual injuries. A lot of our males are missing ears or have shredded ears, big scars all over their face and neck. But outside the breeding season, they have a social hierarchy, and so they settle most disputes just through body posturing and bluffing and that kind of stuff without any actual contact.
You can do the next one.
So you can see they settled the dispute over the carcass without actually making contact with each other. Next slide. Now I'll go into a little bit more research on bear safety. Every time we have a bear-inflicted human injury, it makes worldwide news on social media. It's all around the world. And people are always saying, oh, injuries are increasing. So I looked at all our injury data going back to 1979. So we had that dump closure period, and then from 79 forward is kind of the modern era of bear management where bears in the park haven't been getting a lot of human foods. And injuries really decreased after that. And so this data, again, is from 1979 through 2025. And you can see I had 7,090 human grizzly bear encounters reported in the backcountry. These are all backcountry. And in 35% of those, the bears fled. 58% the bears had a neutral reaction, just kept doing what they were doing. 3% the bears had a curious response, actually walked up, head up, ears erect towards people, or followed people down the trail for a short ways. The bears showed stress or warning in 4%, slapping the ground, jumping out their lips, popping their jaws, warning people that they're too close. And then actual attacks occurred in less than 1% of those human grizzly bear encounters. Next slide. This is the same data for black bears. We had 10,081 human black bear encounters reported. Again, the black bears fled in 34%, had a neutral response in 62%, a curious reaction in 2%, again, approached or followed people, stress or warning in only 1%, so lower than with grizzly bears. And then black bears attacking people was also less than 1% of these interactions. Next slide. And then I looked at the risk of attack based on the number of park visitors and some major activity categories for those visitors. So for all visitors combined, we saw 1 grizzly bear inflicted human injury per 3.6 million park visitors. However, not all visitors obviously have the same risk of encountering a bear. So I also broke it down into some different major categories that we could look at. So most of our park visitors, they stay in the front country, the developed areas, the roadsides and roadside pullouts, and then those boardwalk trails in the thermal areas. And for those visitors that don't leave the front country, we saw 1 grizzly bear inflicted human injury per 69.7 million park visits. So pretty low risk. For the little more adventuresome folks that camped in our roadside campgrounds, we saw one grizzly bear inflicted human injury per 29.2 million overnight stays. So a little riskier, but still pretty low risk. And then for the really adventuresome visitor that got a permit and went backpacking in the park's backcountry, we saw one grizzly bear inflicted human injury per 1.9 million overnight stays. And then the people most at risk is just hikers, backpackers or day hikers when they're hiking. For a backpacker, when they're hiking between campsites, you're pretty safe once you're in your campsite. But hiking between campsites, we saw one grizzly bear inflicted human injury per 275,144 backcountry recreation days. So again, that's almost always surprise encounters between a hiker and a female grizzly bear with cubs, mostly cubs of the year, and encounters at about 20 yards or less. And then we also looked at people that reported having an encounter and then whether they were injured by the bear or not during that encounter. And for that, we saw one grizzly bear attack per 88 backcountry encounters. I mean, obviously you can't get injured by a bear unless you have an encounter with one. We think this is biased high though, because a lot of people, if they run into a bear in the backcountry, the bear just runs away, they're probably not gonna report it because nothing happened. Whereas if they get injured, we usually have to rescue them, and then we know they got injured. So we think injuries are reported at a higher rate than the benign encounters. Next slide. This is the same data except for black bears. Again, for all visitors combined, black bears are much more timid than grizzly bears. For all visitors combined, we see one injury per 23.2 million visits. But again, not all visitors have the same chance of encountering a bear. So for those visitors that just stay, again, in the front country, developed areas, roadsides, boardwalk trails, we see one injury per 139.4 million visits. So much lower rate than with grizzly bears. Roadside campgrounds, going back to 1979, we didn't have a single black bear inflicted human injury in a roadside campground. Backcountry campsites, though, this is interesting. For grizzly bears, it was one injury per 1.9 million overnight stays. For black bears, it was one injury per 618,000 overnight stays. So you're actually more likely to be injured by a black bear in a backcountry campsite than by a grizzly bear. These black bear injuries, though, I think it's I wouldn't call it predation, but it's a precursor to test to see what your reaction is. So it's almost always people laying in a tent or on the ground, and they feel a sharp bite, they jump up and yell, and they see a black bear running away. So it's kind of like a test of how you're gonna react. And if you react appropriately, the aggressive yell, the bear runs away. But still, black bears injure more people in backcountry campsites than grizzly bears do. Then we looked at, with hiking, between campsites, we saw one black bear inflicted human injury per 1.4 million backcountry hiking days. So you can see, surprising encounters, black bears are much less likely to injure somebody, but in a backcountry campsite, they're more likely to injure somebody. And then we also looked at reported encounters between backpackers and black bears, and we saw one black bear inflicted human injury for 343 backcountry encounters. And again, I think that's biased high because the benign encounters where bears don't do anything probably don't get reported at the same rate as the situation where somebody actually gets hurt and we have to rescue them. Next slide. This shows the per capita rate of grizzly bear inflicted human injuries. So this is the number of grizzly bear inflicted human injuries per 1 million park visits per decade. And so you can see the last 2 decades, the last 20 years, we're at the lowest rate we've ever been for a per capita rate of bear inflicted human injuries. This is a lot we cleaned up the park as far as food and garbage. And we also do a lot more educational things with park visitors to teach them how to recreate in that park's backcountry without coming into conflict with bears. Next slide. So I'll cover bear safety really quick. When you're hiking in grizzly bear country, you want to be vigilant. Don't be daydreaming as you're hiking. You want to look around. Your head should be on a swivel, looking for bears. Make noise in areas with poor visibility. Don't run. Bears chase things that run. They run down elk calves all the time. Carry bear spray, know how to use it. Hiking groups of 3 or more people. 95% of our injuries are solo hikers or parties of 2. Parties of 3 or more are only 5% of our injuries. So party size plays a big role. And then staying on maintained trails. We see a lower rate of bear-inflicted human injuries on designated trails because bears get a little more used to running into people on trails. They're a little more surprised if you have an off-trail encounter. Next slide. So if you do have a surprise encounter in the backcountry, we recommend first slowly backing away. By putting distance between you and that female with cubs, it will often diffuse the situation. However, if you start to back away and that bear charges, or if she immediately charges during the encounter, then you want to stand your ground and use your bear spray. And just by standing your ground, even if you don't have bear spray, usually the bear is going to veer off to the side, or he might stop right in front of you. He's going to slap the ground, pop his jaws, jut his lips out. They kind of do a blowing up. That's a lot of bluff and bluster. He's saying you're too close, back off. If you have a surprise encounter and the bear does make contact, then you want to play dead. If you play dead during a surprise encounter, 80% of the people that play dead only receive very minor injuries. If you fight back, 80% receive really severe injuries. So again, in a surprise encounter, a lot of people think the bear just wants to kill and eat you. That's not the case. They're trying to defend their cubs or themselves or a food like a carcass from a perceived threat. And once they neutralize that threat, if it's a female with cubs, she's going to gather up her cubs and leave. Next slide. So during a surprise encounter, it's defensive aggression, and the bear's ears are going to be laid back. And it seems like the more the ears are laid back, the more serious the bear is. I don't have a lot of data on that yet, so I'm looking for volunteers. But that's the way it seems. If the ears are flat back, then they're usually pretty serious in that charge. Next slide. We're a curious bear, and a curious bear could turn predatory, but predatory, we've only had 2 or 3 incidents in the whole history of Yellowstone Park that appear to be predatory. But a curious bear is going to approach head up, ears erect, and slowly walk up to you. And with a bear like that, you don't want to play dead. You want to be aggressive, yell at the bear. Don't let it think it can just walk up and treat you as prey. We had a woman worked at the post office at Lake Village years ago. She was out for a jog in the morning at 6:30 a.m., ran into a little sub-adult grizzly bear on the spawning stream. She did almost everything right and only sustained very minor injuries, but there's just a few things she could have done differently. So she's jogging along the road, sees this bear next to the spawning stream. She stops, she doesn't panic. The bear stops doing what it's doing, digging roots, and looks at her. She thought, well, you shouldn't look a bear in the eye. So she said, I went into the tree position, which was and she's holding a water bottle. She just looked at the sky, hoping the bear would go away. And she's kind of just watching the bear out of the corner of her eye. The bear stands up on 2 legs, which is not an aggressive posture. That's an information gathering posture. Looks at her. She's still in the tree position, looking up at the sky. The bear drops down to all 4 legs, slowly walks up to her, head up, ears erect. She can feel the bear's breath on her hands, so she raises her hands that are holding the water bottle. The bear then takes its mouth, puts it around her thigh, and just slowly starts to bite harder and harder. Again, this is a sub-adult grizzly, a little 3-year-old. He's new in the world without mom, trying to figure stuff out, gonna see what she's gonna do. She does not panic. She realizes the tree position ain't working. So she takes her water bottle and she squirts the bear in the face. It gets wide-eyed, lets go of her leg, and runs away. So she did almost everything right. She only had these 4 very barely punctured the skin canine bites. So she's got a cool story, probably some cool scars. The one thing she could have done, though, was when that bear slowly started walking up to her, she should have yelled at it, thrown her water bottle at it, not let it walk up and put its mouth around her thigh. But I don't want to criticize anything she did because, what she did, she came out with very minor injuries and she didn't panic. Next slide. So if you do have a curious or predatory bear, you want to be aggressive, fight back, use any available weapon, whatever you got, and try to convince that bear that you're not prey. Next slide. This is a photo from Romania. I was at an international bear conference, and a guy showed this slide. Well, in Romania, they don't allow bear spray. So they use the baseball bat. I recommend bear spray. You don't have to get as close, and you don't have to be a good shot with bear spray. You don't have to aim, really. You just got to point it and press the trigger, and it comes out in a big cloud pattern. And bear spray's been over 90% effective at stopping aggressive behavior in bears. There's a lot of people also carry guns. I'm not going to tell that's a personal choice what you do. In Yellowstone Park, you're allowed to carry a gun, but technically you're not allowed to discharge a gun. So we recommend bear spray. If you're outside the park, again, that's a personal choice of what you're going to carry. Next slide. And I will say, because a lot of people here probably spend a lot of time in national forests as well, bear spray was greater than 90% effective. Firearms, pistols were actually slightly better than rifles. I think just because rifles are usually slung over the shoulder, pistols were more readily accessible. But firearms were like 70 to 80% effective, and bear spray is over 90% effective. How do you use bear spray? As soon as the bear is 60 feet or closer and charging, you want to deploy the bear spray, put up a big cloud that the bear has to run through, and then just empty that bear spray into the bear's face. Next slide. Now, bear spray is not used like insect repellent. If you ever do this, it'll ruin your day and you'll never do it again. Next slide. Also, don't think you can spray equipment. How bear spray works, it comes in a really fine mist, and a charging bear is breathing hard, and it seems to work best on charging bears rather than just a bear that's walking. And they breathe, it gets into their eyes, their nose, their lungs, and they start coughing, and they usually turn away. Once you spray it on something, it's no longer in that really fine mist. Then it's just a hot, spicy solution, which could actually attract a bear. Think of it like Tabasco sauce. Tastes great on your eggs, but you wouldn't want to have it thrown in your eyes. There was a guy in Alaska actually sprayed a circle of bear spray around his tent, slept great, thought he had this invisible barrier. When he got up in the morning, there was bear tracks coming into camp, and that whole circle was dug up and rolled in by the bear, and then the bear left. Next slide. Bear spray is also dangerous. Bear spray can explode at 120 degrees. The dash of your car or pickup on a hot July or August day can get up to 140 degrees. This was a Yellowstone Park interpretive ranger, had one on the dash of their personal pickup, and it blew up and actually embedded in the roof of their pickup. So bear spray companies make these safety toes. It's a plastic toe lined with foam, and it just has a little pinhole in the top, so the pressure can be released, but the foam absorbs almost all of the hot, spicy solution. So if you're going to keep it inside a vehicle, you want to have it in there and in the shade. If you have a pickup, it's best just to keep it in the back of your pickup. That way, if it blows up, it doesn't ruin the inside of your pickup or your day. Next slide. Now we're getting close to the end. We're going to cover just a couple bear myths. So this wise old bear here is going to answer bear myth questions. Next slide. So bear myth number one is that bears can't run downhill. When you look at a bear, some people think, well, their front legs look longer than their back legs. So if you have an encounter with a bear, you can just run downhill and it'll get away. All bears have four-wheel drive. You only have two-wheel. Bears have studded tires, big claws. You don't. Bears are faster than Olympic sprinters. There might be a couple people in here that fast, but bears are also faster than Olympic sprinters on steroids. I know nobody in here is on steroids. So you can't outrun a bear. So don't run from a bear unless you know you can get inside a secure building or inside a vehicle before that bear can catch up to you. Next slide. Bear myth number 2 is that grizzly bears can't climb trees. Before I came to the Yellowstone ecosystem, I was working with black bears in northern Minnesota. Our bears climb trees all the time. But I had always heard that grizzly bears didn't climb trees. Well, the Park Service assigned me to this ancient house with a historic apple orchard. Next slide. And one day I was looking out, and there was a bunch of ripe apples that had fallen out of the tree. This is like my first year in the park. This grizzly bear comes in, and he's eating the ripe apples that have fallen on the ground. Next slide. He finishes all the apples on the ground, and he can smell the nice ripe apples that are still up in the tree. Next slide. So he climbs the tree. Next slide. He doesn't just stay near the bottom, he goes right up towards the top. Next slide. And next slide. And he's quite comfortable up in the tree. So just think, if there's something up a tree a grizzly bear really wants, a grizzly bear can likely get up that tree to get it. Next slide. Bear myth number 3 is if the bear stands up on 2 legs, that means it's going to attack. Next slide. Bears stand up on 2 legs for a lot of reasons, sometimes just to scratch. Mostly though, it's an information gathering posture. They're trying to get a better sense of, better smell, see what's out there, a better look. And a bear standing on 2 legs might drop down to all fours and run away as soon as he figures out what you are. He might go back to what he was doing, digging roots or whatever, or he might charge. So at this point, you can still change the behavior. So when I have a bear stand up in front of me, I start backing away and talking to the bear in kind of a low, calm voice so they can figure out that I'm a human. Sometimes if the wind is not from me to the bear is going to run a half circle to get downwind to smell me, and then it's going to decide what it's going to do. But certainly don't panic when you have a bear standing on 2 legs in front of you, because you can still change the outcome at that point. And this is not an aggressive posture, it's an information gathering posture. Next slide. So again, the bear's trying to determine what you are and what your intentions are before it decides what it's going to do. Next slide. Bear myth number 4, bears have poor eyesight. Next slide. So with humans, eyesight is our primary sense. With bears, their eyesight's about equivalent to humans, but their nose is hundreds of times better than humans. So a bear has a sense of smell even a couple hundred times better than the best hunting hound dogs. So a bear can determine a lot of things through its nose that we can't even imagine. So sometimes you'll encounter a bear 10 yards away and he stands up and he's got his nose in there and you think, well, that bear can't see me. Well, he can see you, but he's using his nose to figure out. I think they can sense fear and they can sense confidence. Be aware, bears, they have eyesight almost equivalent to a human's, but their sense of smell is much better. Next slide. Bear myth number 5, bears are the most dangerous animal in the park. As I mentioned, we average 1 grizzly bear inflicted human injury per year. In the park, we average about 1 black bear injury every closer to 6 years in the park. So pretty low rate considering we have 5 million park visits. Next slide. Bison. It's interesting. If there's a bear next to the road, everyone's calling me, my God, you gotta do something, somebody's gonna get hurt. Bison injure about 4 times as many people every year as bears. And there could be a whole herd of bison in the road and nobody thinks twice about it. But this is really the most dangerous animal in Yellowstone National Park. Next slide. Bear myth number 6 is that bears emerge from hibernation ravenously hungry and therefore much more dangerous since they have not eaten all winter. Actually, bears are living off their fat all winter. When they first come out of the den, our males start coming out the first week of March. It takes them a while to get their digestive systems and everything back in order. So a lot of times they might even find a carcass and they might just sleep on it for 3 days. It takes like 10 days to 2 weeks or more before bears really start eating a lot. So from my experience in the spring, I've run into a lot of bears cross-country skiing. If they're post-holing and I'm skiing, they just kind of look at me like, okay, you leave me alone, I'll leave you alone. I've never had a bear charge me early in the spring when they've just come out of hibernation. Next slide. I'll just go to the next one and kind of explain this. So we're going to end the program tonight with the top 17 weird ways to die in Yellowstone. So when I give the safety talk, I always get people coming up to me afterwards and saying, "Oh my God, I'll never hike in Yellowstone again." Yellowstone is a great place to hike. Really, my intent was just to give you the knowledge and skills to reduce the risk of hiking in Yellowstone's backcountry. In Yellowstone National Park, the top 2 ways that most people die is in car accidents. We have these narrow, winding roads, no shoulders, a lot of cool wildlife, people rubbernecking, not looking. They get in car accidents. When they get helicoptered out of the park, usually a lot of them die in hospitals. So we don't really have good, solid numbers on how many people die in car wrecks. But just from what I hear over the radio, it's way more than bear injuries every year. The second most common way is heart attacks. A lot of people, they come to Yellowstone, they haven't gone on a hike in 30 years, and they're climbing Mount Washburn, So we have a lot of old people that die of heart attacks. Again, a lot of times they're alive when they leave the park in the ambulance or the helicopter, and they die later. So those are the top 2 ways that people die in Yellowstone. So this is the top 17 weird ways, other than car accidents and heart attacks, that people die in Yellowstone National Park. By far, number 1 is drowning. In the history of the park, we've had 119 people drown. Actually, we had one already this summer on Yellowstone Lake, a kayaker, so that's up to 120 now. The number 2 weird way to die in Yellowstone, falling off a cliff. We've had 36 people die that way. The number 3 weird way to die in Yellowstone, kind of sad, suicide. A lot of people come to beautiful areas, national parks, commit suicide. We go to great lengths to teach people how not to get injured by a bear, how not to get injured by a bison, how not to fall in a thermal area. But we probably should do more about suicide in the park, because that's the number 3 weird way to die here. So actually, you guys are all more likely to kill yourself while visiting the park than to be killed by a bear. Airplane crashes. We've had 22 people die that way. It's usually small airplanes in the mountainous air currents. We have had a couple military planes back in the 40s and stuff that crashed and killed people. But that's the number 4 weird way to die in Yellowstone. The number 5 weird way to die in Yellowstone, probably the worst way to go, falling into a superheated, boiling, acidic hot pool. We've had 20 people die that way. Burns are probably the most painful way to go. We had a guy a few years ago at the Norris Geyser Basin. He went to stick his toe in to see if there was a temperature he could hot pot in. He slipped and fell in a superheated, acidic pool. And by the time park rescue, he was dead immediately. But by the time the park could get him out, really all we got was his wallet and his sandals, and he was completely dissolved. We had a suicide actually at West Thumb a couple of years ago, and all we found was a shoe with the foot bones in it floating in the pool. Next slide, we'll get to happier things. Horse-related accidents, early history of the park, all travel was by horse and wagon, so most of those 19 horse-related accidents are from the early history of the park. But we still have horse rides out of the Roosevelt area and stagecoach rides as well. And we occasionally get somebody thrown from a horse that hits their head on a rock and dies that way. Freezing to death, we've had 10 people die that way. Hypothermia. The number 8 weird way to die in Yellowstone, murder. Probably comforting to know you're more likely to be murdered while visiting the park than to be killed by a bear. And then bear attacks. In the history of the park, since 1872, we've had 8 people killed by bears. 7 of them were by grizzly bears, and in 1942 there was a bear-caused fatality in the Old Faithful area where a woman went out to the restroom at like 2 in the morning, got attacked by a bear. Some of the witnesses that heard her screaming came out and said it was a black bear. Other of the witnesses that came out and saw the bear said it was a grizzly bear. She went to a hospital outside the park and died several days later. And so that one we don't know if it was a grizzly bear or a black bear because witnesses reported it both ways. Number 10, carbon monoxide. We've had early history of the park. A lot of people went into thermal caves in the park. We had a number of people die that way. Next slide. Cultural strife. The Nez Perce War of 1877. So Custer was killed over by Billings, Montana in 1876. In 1877, the U.S. government tried to force the Nez Perce tribe onto a reservation. They didn't want to go. They fled. They were trying to make it to Canada. They came through Yellowstone National Park. In 1877, the park was established in 1872. So the park had tourists in it while this war was going on with the Nez Perce. One park visitor was shot right off the steps of the Mammoth Hotel. Another camping party in Hayden Valley had somebody killed, and then several Native Americans were killed in that battle as well. The number 12 weird way to die in Yellowstone, having a tree fall on you in the head and kill you. We've had 6 people die that way. We have a lot of lodgepole pine, shallow root system, big windstorms blows these trees over. Avalanches, we've had 6 people die that way. And then struck by lightning, we've had 6 people struck by lightning and killed. So the odds are almost the same as being struck by lightning. We've had 8 people killed by bears, 6 people killed by lightning. So the odds are pretty similar there. Number 15, weird way to die in Yellowstone, missing and presumed dead. We've had 5 people die that way. They were here, they disappeared, we looked for them, we couldn't find them. Their friends and relatives never heard from them again, so we assume they're dead. Next slide. So rounding out the top 17 weird ways to die in Yellowstone, having a rock fall off a cliff and hit you on the head. We've had 3 people die that way. And then killed in structural fires, we've had 3 people die that way. Next slide. So again, a little safety reminder, hiking groups of 3 or more, make noise in areas with poor visibility, be vigilant, have your head on the swivel when you're hiking in bear country, carry bear spray, know how to use it, and stay on maintained trails and be safe out there. Next slide. Okay, I could answer any questions that people might have. We think, like, we can't ask a tree, but we think some years they put out a ton of cones, and there's so many that bears and Clark's nutcrackers and squirrels and all the things that eat them can't eat them all, so that helps their reproduction. Then other years, it's maybe a way to reduce the species that eat them, because then they don't put out hardly any. And so the squirrels can't really survive in pure white bark during years with poor cone production. So a lot of the squirrel use is in mixed stands where there's both white bark and other tree species. And part of it might just be nutrient, like recouping nutrients used up in reproduction. So they need a year or 2 off. Oh, it's phenomenal. And last year was limber pine, was really big. This year is white bark pine.
You mentioned the park's bear management interface plan. What about urban areas? So Cody, Hook City, but also now Livingston, maybe Bozeman will get it soon, and then Idaho Falls. Yeah, so outside the park, we don't have any jurisdiction there, but the state fish and game agency, so Montana Fish, Wildlife Parks, Idaho Fish and Game, Wyoming Game and Fish, they manage that interface in areas outside the park. And they're starting a lot of bear-wise communities to clean up these areas. And one problem we have, though, is the bears are expanding faster than we can clean up these communities. Cook City and Silvergate used to be really big problems, and they've done a great job. You see bear-proof garbage cans, and conflicts are way down from what they are. They're still working on it to improve it. Same with Gardner. Livingston, I don't know if they've hit yet. Bozeman is definitely already having problems with black bears. So it usually starts with bear-proof garbage cans. So I'll use Gardner as an example. So Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, and then Evan Stout with Bear Aware Gardner, which is a nonprofit, works with the state of Montana, and they're trying to bear-proof Gardner. So they've purchased well over 300 bear-proof garbage cans. They've purchased bear-proof grease traps for the restaurants. They have a program, apple trees attract a lot of bears in their communities. So they have a program where they'll pick your apples if you don't want them, or they'll pick them and give them to you. Or if you don't want the apple tree, they'll cut the apple tree down and replace it with an aspen or a non-fruit bearing tree.
So they're trying to get rid of the apple trees inside these communities. So there's a lot of efforts like that going on throughout the state. The problem is generally funding and bears advancing faster than we can keep up.
Can you talk about the impact of the wolves on the grizzly population?
With wolves, what we saw, we used to see a big amount of use of winter-killed carcasses by bears in the spring. So bears or elk and bison stuff would die over the winter. Bears would come out of hibernation and feed on those. So we'd see this big spike in meat in the spring. After wolf reintroduction, we don't see many ungulates dying over the winter. We see a lot fewer now because wolves are culling those. But bears are then taking the wolf carcasses. So wolves are killing bison and elk all spring, summer, and fall. And so bears are now eating meat spring, summer, and fall to a greater extent than they did prior to wolf reintroduction. So there's some costs and some benefits. Bears are eating more meat, and it's scattered throughout the year now. But occasionally a wolf pack might kill a bear cub. So there's a little give and take there.
One of the tips you gave was to hike on trails. Why is that?
Bears get more used to seeing people on trails because about 70% of our hikers from the surveys that we've done never leave the trail. And then a lot of even the people that go off trail spend most of their time on trails. So bears, they key into when people are active and where people are active. And so a trail is, even though people are kind of random of when they're hiking, it's still predictable in the location where they're going to run into people. So they just seem to be more surprised in off trail. And as I said, about 70% of our hikers never leave the trail, but about 50% of our injuries are off trail hikers. So higher than you would expect based on the number of people hiking off trail. Question?
How many bears are relocated out of Yellowstone into our neighborhoods this year?
At the Yellowstone National Park? 0. We almost never move a bear anymore. Relocation rarely works. I used to do a lot of it early in my career, but about 70% of the bear times, if you have a problem bear and you move it, about 70% of the time it's going to cause more conflicts, maybe just in a different area. And on a long-term basis, only about 3% of those conflict bears that you move ever survive and die naturally over the long term. 97% of them die at human hands eventually. So I can't even remember the last time we relocated a bear.
Outside of the park.
Outside of the park, it's much more common. Outside the park, it's harder to manage because you have a lot of private land. And so some state agencies move a lot of bears, some don't. But with private land, if the landowner complains, they have to, at least at a minimum, move the bear. So that's one reason why they move a lot more. Yeah, I'll let you talk to them so you can hear me.
This is kind of a follow-up to the wolf-bear interaction question. I know a guide, she does tour guides of Yellowstone. She's used to live up there. Her name is Audra. She's very reliable. I don't think she posts anything doctored. And she posted either this morning or yesterday morning, maybe some of you saw it, both grizzlies and wolves on a bison carcass together eating. There were 6 grizzlies, one very large one who sat back against a tree and was kind of just 4 grizzlies, sorry. And 13 wolves. You have photos. Okay, but it just, I'm from here and I was sort of like, that doesn't look normal to me. Can you comment on that? They seemed happy with one another.
Yeah, when food is abundant, there's a lot more tolerance between bears and other species. For instance, in Hayden Valley, we've seen 23 grizzlies on one carcass. So when they're eating well, you'll see more of that. If foods are scarce, they'll fight more over that kind of stuff. Okay, last question.
Yeah, okay, one more thing about meat eating. What are the census counts for the ungulate prey species in the area? Are they stable, up, down?
Currently, bison are up. Elk are stable, but at a lower rate. At one point, we had 19,000 elk on the northern range. Over time, with of the full suite of predators and everything now, we're down to about 8,000 to 9,000 elk and about 5,000 to 6,000 bison. So elk are currently have been stable for a few years after declining, and bison are increasing slowly.
Okay.
Thanks for coming.
All proceeds donated from the HAB are going to be donated to Yellowstone Forever for their bear conservation fund. Next week's speaker is going to be Tanner Haber. He's a wildlife cinematographer. It'll be like a grizzly themed movie night next Friday for those who can attend. As many of you know, this normally isn't an event space. If you could help me put the little folding chairs in the corner over there, drag the little wooden tables in the middle, and put the little wooden chairs around them, that would be great. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks for being my clicker. Yeah. You have one in the big one, and we got in. So they're getting. Yeah. Okay. Like an air horn?
Yeah.
I until recently I've never known how that would work.
It works.
Yeah, we've had in the last like 3 years we've had 3 or 4 people that use air horns. One guy even had bear spray and an air horn. He blew the air horn, and the bear left. He never even had to use the bear spray. Yeah, whatever. It's a personal choice. Whatever offensive weapon you want. Well, air horn's not a weapon. Yeah, thanks for coming.
Hi, I'm Russ. I do wildlife photography. Pretty much every day. I want to thank you and other people I saw.
You might know the answer.
Oh, yeah.
So
And,
I couldn't get
you guys
a
out
picture
there
of it, but the map where he says there's like about a 60-mile
There.
gap between the
I'm
Yellowstone
managing
and
traffic.
yeah. Where is
Trying to keep people away.
Yeah.
So,
That's great.
the past 3 or 4 days, this one was passed. Sandy Valley, conference,
So is it I-90
There's
that
also carcasses.
They need to cross.
they needed a bridge? They need a bridge.
I want to get a picture. I guess what I'm trying to ask you, I know you said we need to get 80% and get there.
Yeah.
Okay, but we spent 3 or 4 days. April, she's over there. Okay. You know, she's running into everything that was on. We couldn't get Is there some calls? Is there anything that we can do? It went on for days.
Yeah, it's tough just because
You have limited budget.
yeah, we have limited budget. The only phone number you got to be 911 to that level.
I talked to him at the gate. They put me in contact with somebody. We still didn't have anybody.
Yeah. Like in the tower area, we might have 10 bear cams for staff. So
Yeah.
triage is okay.
So there's not much we can do.
Yeah, it just politely tell people don't get into a fist fight over it.
No, I'm not saying that we like harassment down there.
Yeah.
But I mean,
You can stay and talk.
Yeah, it's frustrating.
I mean, it's been
You don't have to wait for me, but
unfortunately,
you know, I don't think I'll be long. I just have a quick question.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
And if
We'll
you
keep
don't
trying.
wait, though.
all right.
Okay. They do use the rub trees. I haven't caught any on camera, so I don't know if they're doing the twisting. But they definitely do the rubbing. I'm pretty sure they're probably using the same tracks. Yeah.
Fully aware of it. Should I go to areas that I know are not the bear?
Or are these areas like with spawning salmon? Because those bears,
What time of year depending?
yeah, but those bears are usually really, I just call them fat and happy. Like
Yeah, no, they're all.
they could mess with you, or they could just eat another big salmon. So they're gonna eat the salmon. So it's a lot safer there, even on those bear trails and stuff, because they're not food stressed like our bears down here.
Like our whole team, everything's concerned about what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be aware, my head on a swivel, but it wouldn't be like walking bear trails down here. Yeah.
So your map with Yellowstone and glacier populations and the 60-mile gap, where is that?
I'm trying to remember where.
Right? You know, off the top of my head, I can't remember
Okay,
exactly.
because I'm wondering I support the Yellowstone Region.
Yeah.
And I've been working with them, and I'm wondering
And
what needs to happen there.
I didn't mean to be over optimistic here, because there's definitely a lot of private land in that gap.
But I'm
And
wondering
that-
if it
and the public land is usually high elevation stuff that all has that. So it's still going to take some work.
and that's a place where we need a wildlife area.
There's a lot of great papers out that show the map that activity between like there's Livingston, there's Bozeman, and then like over IDT as well.
Yeah, there's an in-range group that's like in Bozeman that's working with that. And they've done
But they've mapped, they've modeled the different paths, the hotspots, where it's most likely to go.
Did you notice that? It's papers I've come across.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, or look up inter-range super study team.
Yeah. 2 seconds after he like went. Did you notice I was but then he literally almost
I live in Bozeman.
and the guy two
End live stream. Here we go.